Having an accurate underdrawing is very important to the foundation of my artwork, just as using artist quality materials is to the integrity of my work. Here I have pre-printed gridded sheets, one that's translucent that goes over the reference, and the other is just a normal photocopy paper about 80 GSM. I find this a much quicker method rather than having to draw up the lines myself. There are, of course, other ways to lay down your underdrawing. If it's relatively complicated, this is what I typically use, but for simpler images, I will just freehand draw or use a basic cross or diagonal lines to help with placement. This is a divider tool that I'm using. It's great for just checking placement and accuracy of the line work. This is the finished gridded drawing, which I'll now transfer to my surface using graphite paper and embossing tool, just going over all the lines. This is the completed underdrawing using a pastel pencil showing more detail. A colour picker chart which shows a basic colour palette. I'm now going to match colours using my pencil colour charts first. My isolated cards make it much easier to compare the colours. Sometimes I'll need to make adjustments by adding another colour or tinting and shading. I will now go over different areas of my colour reference to match the colours and create a palette. I will go through the same process now with the soft pastels. Some more colour studies beforehand just to feel more comfortable with my colour choices. Starting on the background, which is the area that I usually do first, I always work from the furthest away coming forward so that my subject sits on the top. I chose the pastel 6 in the end for the easier blending and the quicker coverage, and I mixed the green and the white together to get a lighter value. Typically, I work from the top down and left to right to avoid smudging, and sometimes I use this handmade mile stick, which is a solid ruler with a couple of feet on the base just to rest my hand on. It has a hole at the top which I can put over a hook that's on my easel, and it allows me to swing it from left to right. Luna's ears are fairly light in colour on the inside, so I'm not going to go in with too heavier coloured pencils. I'm using my pinks and greys. So I'm working over the surface, just layering up the colour, and then I'll gradually bring in the lightest pencil, which is the white, and go over it to create the individual hairs. If I'm working with a printed colour reference, I like to have it as close as possible to my work, just because it's so much easier to read. It's almost like working on them simultaneously. For most of my work, I actually use a tablet to look at my colour reference. I find the colours much more accurate, and I can go in, zoom into my image, look at the details and see the nuances of colour. And of course I don't have to pay for the printing of an image. The only downside to using a tablet is the way the light affects the screen. So I quite often work with the blinds shut and just use a daylight lamp. You will notice that I'm holding the pencils in a few different ways, just depending on which direction the hair is going. I don't use my fingers much with blending, especially with this type of hair work. And with the surface that I'm working on and the way I layer the pencils, they just blend themselves. As I work through my image, I will typically finish areas as I go. As I work my way across Luna's head, I'm creating individual hair work. Some of it will overlap and some will be closer together. They're all pretty consistently vertical strokes here. If you study animal hair closely, you will see that the hair is not always in the same direction and not always the same length. Because I've already finished the background, I'm able to create the outer hair of the cat to look more realistic as it sits over the top. The sharper my pencils are, the finer my hair detail is. I'm constantly checking my reference to make sure that my colors and values are correct, and of course introducing new colors as I see them. I'm laying down my middle values and bringing in my darks and then my lights over the top. When I'm creating the hair work, the pressure of my pencil is pretty consistent, and I find layering this way works really well. Of course, if I need to intensify the color anywhere, I'll just use a bit more pressure. Working my way across and down the forehead, just observing the different patterns in the hair. As I'm working, my eye does tend to wander over the area I've just done, and I'm constantly tweaking or adding a little bit of color. Continuing on down the forehead, some of the hair work here is a lot longer, and there's a little bit more contrast. Always observing the patterns. Working on Luna's left eye now, I'm going to be layering color with the pencils, still working up from my darker values to my lightest values. Each colour will blend slightly with the colour underneath it, and as I get lighter and lighter and introduce the white, it creates that wet, glassy look. Apologies for the stray hair across the screen. I completely forgot to tie my hair up and didn't notice until after I'd viewed the video. So it was actually not viewable and had to delete a whole section. I'm going to be using soft pastel in the longer hair work of the body, especially with the lighter areas. I find that it really creates a soft, fluffy feel. Moving to the back area, I'm using the selection of greys, some of the browns, a little bit of the pink, and the pale olive and the white for the lighter hairs over the top. Just bringing some of the colour from that back hair area into the white. And when we do work the wispy hair, it will look like it's sitting over the top. Just completed the bridge of the nose where the hair is very close to the skin. So a lot of the marks are very short. And I've done that with some of the warm greys and a little bit of ochre. Just working now on the softer part of the nose with a bit of sanguine, some ochre and some black. Going back into the bridge area, making a few adjustments, putting in some more hair and creating some contrast and bringing in a little bit of the pale olive and white. Making some more adjustments to that skin colour by adding a little bit of the grey and some caput mortem. Adding the white highlights for that wet look. Now working on the other eye, and firstly using black to put in the surrounding shadow area of the eye socket. That includes the limbus, or the black line that's around the iris, and the edge of the third eyelid. I like to spend a lot of time working on the eyes. I think they're one of the most important areas of the animal. They really bring it to life. So I'm spending a little bit more time here just trying to get the shape right. Just bringing in a bit of raw umber here, which creates a softer value shift from the darker area onto the iris. I've slowed down the video a bit while I'm working on this eye. It's not real time, but it will give you an idea of how slowly and precisely I work. I'm putting the white highlight in here early on. The surface seems to have a memory for those first layers, and when I come back in, I want to retain the intensity of colour there. And I will come back in here and add a little bit of blue, which of course is reflected from the sky. Getting into the colours of the iris, I'm just laying down the middle values, the ochres, some cool green and the olive greens, just keeping my layers very light and the pressure of my pencil quite consistently light. These pastel pencils I'm using here are quite soft, and they certainly make the colour blending a lot easier. As I build up the layers slowly, the colours just seem to blend themselves quite smoothly. One of the great characteristics of this surface that I'm working on is that when you get up to about the third layer, you have way more control over your values. It's when the magic happens. Sometimes when you're working away, you might notice that an area will need some tweaking. And looking at the shape of this eye, I think I'm going to have to rework that a little bit. These pencil erasers are great to have in your toolkit. I have a couple of them. This one is slightly bigger diameter, but really great for erasing or refining some of those smaller areas. You can see the irises and the eyes are slightly different sizes, and this is because this eye is more in the shadow area, a little bit further away from the light source. Getting a little sidetracked here, which can happen quite a lot, as my eyes tend to wander away from the area I'm working on. I'm now bringing in my much lighter values into the iris. This is the yellow, and I'll bring in the white as well. When you get to this point, this is when the eye can look quite translucent. Continuing to rework the area and adjusting the colours a little bit, darkening the darks and perhaps lightening the lights. Now back to the hair work and working that area under the eye. I'm laying down some of my middle to dark values as a base, and then I'll go in and create the more detailed work over the top with the lighter colours. The hair here is still quite short, and I'm constantly looking at the direction that it's going in. Slowly building up the layers here on the right side of the head with the browns, a few ochres, and the little bit of pink. The hair is a little bit longer here and much softer because there's not a lot of contrast in values. You will notice that my finger touches the surface occasionally, and that's all I'm doing. I'm not rubbing or blending, and that just softens those marks that I've just created. I'm using the white pencil to define the hairs on that top layer, and I'll be alternating between the darks and the lights just to get that contrast right. Just coming back here to refine those top layers a little bit more. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll be jumping about quite often. When I'm working with the hair on those outer areas, I don't want to be too heavy-handed with my marks. I'm trying to keep them quite light and soft, and some of them will even blend with the background color. Back here in the cheek area, laying down those base colors and building up the layers to those lighter defined marks, and constantly looking at the patterns in the hair work. Starting to work here on Luna's body, you can see that the fur has a completely different feel to the face, much longer and much softer, and I'll be using a combination of the soft pastels and the pastel pencils. I'll be laying down the soft pastel as a base layer in some of these areas, and when I bring in a little bit of colour from the pencil, it creates a very subtle tint. Laying down those base colours again here and working up to the lights. Soft pastels have a lot more pigment in them and really give you a much more vibrant, intense colour. And you'll see there is quite a difference between the white pencil and the soft pastel. They both have a place in my work, and that's one of the reasons I love the versatility of pastel. Although I'm using white soft pastel in these really light areas, there are lots of really light pastels out there that are already tinted and they will work just as well. Just going over the space area again, is looking at it, I thought it wasn't dark enough, so I'm coming back in there with the soft pastel raw umber. Just continuing to emphasize the lighter hair work over the top of those base colors. Almost at the end now, and then we'll be putting in some of the final touches. bringing out that white fur even more with the soft pastel. Just introducing a harder pencil here. They have a lot more binder in them, so keep their point a little bit longer. Really good for some of the fine detail. Just going over the whole piece now, just seeing where I may need to lighten the lights and darken the darks and tweak a few of the colors. And we're almost there. Putting in those whiskers, which I always leave to the end. They're a little bit light grey on the left side and they'll be white in the other areas. I'm using that harder pencil for this. And making good use of that handmade marl stick. Some stray pencils floating across the screen there. I was too busy concentrating. I've always got the pencils that I'm using in my left hand. So far managed to keep them away from the screen. I will leave her for now, but plan to work on that jawline a bit more.